We've been asked to do a follow-up to our previous videos, but since most people have come here for a recipe, I'm just going to focus on a recipe right now. I know I certainly hate when I look up a recipe, I get the life story of some person that I don't care about. Today we're just going to be doing a muffin recipe. This can be done in a tin or it can be done in a loaf. Here I'm going to be doing it as a loaf. I'm going to start with 1 egg, and since I don't have any milk, I'm actually going to be substituting milk with a tablespoon of melted butter, as well as a cup of water. Milk is better, however, I'm completely off the grid with very limited refrigeration, electricity, and fuel. And while I do have several shelf-stable milk options available to me, I simply did not want to open up a container. I'm also going to add a 1/4 cup vegetable oil. Since my vegetable oil was in my measuring cup before the water, I'm going to pour that in and then follow up with the water, aka milk substitute. And when you're rationing water in the desert, make sure you don't spill any of it. This is a very flexible and versatile recipe. You can do ham and cheese, or you can do sweet like chocolate chips. Here I'm doing strawberries, but my personal favorite is definitely blueberry. That's what my mom used to make. I'm now going to beat the egg and the rest of the wet ingredients together until it's somewhat emulsified. It will never be perfect because there will be some fats and water that will separate. Just do the best you can. To save you on some dishes to clean, I would recommend you actually do this in the big bowl to begin with. Now I'm going to add in my dry ingredients, starting with 2 cups of flour. Now adding these dry ingredients is better to mix in a separate bowl and then mix together. I was just simply saving dishes to clean. Mixing the dry separately first will ensure that you get an equal distribution of the salts and the baking powder. Speaking of baking powder, make sure you do not use baking soda. They are 2 different products. While both products do contain sodium bicarbonate, baking powder has some additional ingredients. And when it comes to rationing and being on short supply, you can actually make baking powder if you have baking soda and cream of tartar in your cupboard. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below, but I believe the ratio is 2 to 1. So in this case, 2 teaspoons of cream of tartar and 1 teaspoon of baking soda. Since I actually have the baking powder on hand, I'm going to go ahead and use that. One-half teaspoon of salt. I really love these measuring spoons because they're narrow rather than circular. They really get into the containers that you're trying to get the spices and the ingredients out of. And for the last ingredient of our base recipe, 3/4 cup of sugar. And now I'm going to show you what not to do. If you were ever a single bachelor, you know the first thing you're going to grab is a fork and you're just going to start stirring. All you're going to do is cause an entanglement of the protein structures within the batter, and you're going to create glutens. And instead of having a soft, moist cake, you're going to end up with a tough and chewy cake, and you don't want that. So I'm going to stumble around and find a better tool. The best tool would be a silicone spatula. Since I don't have a normal stirring spatula on hand, I'm going to do the best that I can. And instead of stirring, we're going to do what's called folding. This is where we're going to take the batter from the outside of the bowl and pull it into the inside of the bowl, mixing it gently. I remember as a kid, my mom would say, if you did it more than 50 times, then you've made it too tough. This is why on the back of a brownie box, you'll see explicit instructions, sometimes, about how many strokes you're supposed to stir. And since I never went to culinary school, I would love if somebody has some advice on better ways to fold this. I would like to actually get a better folding technique. When it comes to the pan, you'll need to grease the inside of it a little bit. I'm going to use butter here. However, vegetable oil would be better because there's less proteins, causing less burning to the side of the pan. When it comes to baking, I prefer to use a canola oil over a vegetable oil. It's slightly better when it comes to saturated fat. Both are pretty neutral in flavor, so no one will tell the difference. Now, an optional step, and it's completely optional, but highly recommended, is to use parchment paper. Now, when I was a young bachelor, I would avoid using parchment, mainly because the cost is oddly higher than other consumable goods for the kitchen. But it will be much easier to remove your baked goods from the pan. Now, what some people do is they fold their fruit into the batter. Because I'm using strawberries and it's got a high moisture content, I'm actually just going to do a layer in the pan of batter, fruit, and then batter. There may not be a scientific basis for it, but I feel that it has much better structural integrity if you put high moisture fruit in a layer like this. My personal preference is for blueberries to actually be folded in during the folding step. It gives it a somewhat different texture, and it reminds me of what my mom used to make. I'll spread out the top layer, totally entombing the fruit inside. Because this is a sweet version of this recipe, I'm going to sprinkle a little sugar on top. It is completely optional, but it does give it a nice little crunchy texture on top. If this was a savory, I would probably sprinkle something like a shredded cheddar cheese. You're going to place it in a preheated oven at 350 degrees for 50 to 60 minutes, but realistically, you're going to cook it until it's done. What you may notice from the shot, which I didn't at the time until much later, that the pilot light wasn't on for the oven. Assuming your oven is actually on, you can do a test to see if it's actually done. You stick a toothpick. I personally prefer a butter knife because it gives you more surface area, and you just basically see if batter is sticking to it. If you see liquid batter, then you know it's not done. Roughly 50 to 60 minutes later, it is done. And here is my Chef John acoustic test. Unfortunately, I didn't have a fork handy, so I just used my butter knife. And here is the moment where the parchment paper pays off. Again, it's completely optional. Since this is a non-stick baking pan, I'm doing my very best to not actually use a metal utensil to touch it, which I'm totally failing here. Unfortunately, the excess sugars and some of the proteins in the butter are causing this sticking on the end. But because we were using parchment paper, this came out of the loaf pan very easily. The excess crispiness that was left in the pan, well, that's a snack for the chef. Oh, I almost used a metal utensil again. And how does it taste? Well, much better than I anticipated. I don't know if it was the type of strawberries we got or if perhaps maybe some of the water loss in the fruit caused a more concentration of flavors, but it was incredible. It was the strongest, most sweetest strawberry I've had in a very long time. And the whole house smelled like strawberry. So strong it was almost artificial, if you know what I mean. Like, say your older sister's strawberry shortcake doll, which you obviously never played with as a child. Overall, I'm glad how this came out. Even with this sexy pan shot, it may not be perfect, but you can just simply cut off the mistakes. And here's the plated presentation. It may be a little odd, but I personally prefer to do my sweet version of this recipe in a bread pan, and I like to do my savory into portioned out little muffins. I know it sounds strange, but that's the way I like it. Especially if you're going to put it on a thin layer of butter, you don't have to worry about ripping open a muffin, which completely falls apart. And for some additional riffs, I'm going to show you the final product of some alternate versions I did. In this one, I added a little bit of almond extract to the batter, and instead of strawberries, we used up some excess cherries we had. The topping actually came out perfect on this one. And this other one, since we had so many cherries, this is a cherry chocolate. I used 3/4 cup of dark baking cocoa, but you may want to adjust it to your taste. Not too sweet and very chocolatey. pieces for me. Yum, 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 yum. And just clear off the table here. Get ready for the final presentation. Unfortunately, I lost the pan shot of this on my camera. But I still have the interior pan shot. And here's the final product. What kind of riff can you do? Did you do? Will you do? Please link or comment in the comments below. And if you'd like to see more content like this, please subscribe. So here you go, a completely riffable muffin recipe. You can make it sweet or savory. If you want to go savory, I highly recommend using some ham or bacon and some cheddar. You could even toss in some chives. Throw in whatever you want. Savory muffin version of this definitely works great for breakfast on the go. You can just freeze them, and then when you want them, just pop them in the microwave.